Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. Please, if you have any questions, comment, and we will try to get to them as soon as we can. Okay. This week's Parsha is called Chayei Sarah. It begins with the passing of Sarah, but one of the main themes of the Parsha, if you could say, is actually not the passing of Sarah, which is in the beginning of the Parsha, but actually the Shidduch, the match of Isaac. So, at the age of 40, Avraham Avinu, Abraham, decides that actually, maybe Isaac's time to get married. So God says to Abraham that Isaac is not allowed to leave the land of Israel because at that time, the land of Canaan, but it was still the land of what would be the land of Israel. And Isaac had been brought as a sacrifice, even though he was not slaughtered, as we all know the story, but he was brought onto the altar. So therefore, he had the status of a sacrifice, being completely holy to God, and therefore he was not allowed, just like a sacrifice is not allowed to leave the land of Israel, so too Isaac was not supposed to leave the land of Israel. So Abraham appoints his trusted servant, Eliezer, to go and find the shidduch for Isaac on behalf of Abraham. And he tells him to go to his family that's outside the land of Israel. And he makes him swear that he's not going to take from the Canaanite women, and specifically he's going to go back to his family in the land called Haran. I believe that's the name of the place, Aram Naharaim. Anyways, so Eliezer, when he gets to this place, he doesn't know where he's supposed to go. He doesn't know who he's supposed to meet, what he's supposed to do. So he says, he makes a prayer, right? What does a Jew do, or pre-Jew, whatever you want to call him, right? He's a servant of Abraham. He's educated in monotheism. He also had a bris 2 weeks ago's Parsha, right? When Abraham got a bris, so he's fully indoctrinated into monotheism and Abraham's religion. So he makes a prayer. So he says as follows. He says, "O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please cause this to happen to me today and perform loving kindness with my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the water fountain, and the daughters of the people of the city are coming out to draw water. The maiden to whom I will say, lower your pitcher, and I will drink, and she will say, drink, and I will also give your camels a drink. This is the woman that you have designated for your servant, for Isaac, though through her I will know that you have performed loving kindness with my master." Right? So Eliezer makes a prayer that God should reveal to him who is the intended for Isaac by this sign of that if he asks a woman to help him drink, then she also offers to get water for the camels. That is the intended for Isaac. Okay, so that's the prayer he gives, and it says in the Torah in the next verse that before he even finished speaking, and he sees Rivka coming, right, and he has this conversation with her. And she gives he asked, the sign is given. He asks for water for himself, and she also offers for the camels. And she draws water for the camels, and he gives her right away he gives her the jewelry, and she brings him to the house. And we all know in the end of the story, this is actually from the family of Abraham. This is Abraham's niece or great niece, whatever you want to call it, and she is eventually betrothed to Isaac. So that's the story in a nutshell. So we have this prayer. Now we go to the Medrash, and he brings the following idea, that there were 3 people who were answered immediately. Okay, who were they? This story of Eliezer, right? He makes the prayer, and right away he sees Rivka coming. The next one is the story that happened with Moses, and the story that happened with Solomon. Okay, so let's look at those 4 stories. We're going to take a tangent for a minute. We're going to look at the story of Moses, and we're going to look at the story of Solomon, of Shlomo, and we're going to see what these stories are. Okay, what's the story of Moses? The story of Moses was when the people rebelled against Moses. The people was his cousin Korach and his following. He had a little following, 250 men, And Korach rebelled against Moses and said that really Moses, this wasn't really from God, that Moses was supposed to be in charge and all these different things. And he said, how can he makes a whole thing? Maybe really everybody should be a Kohen Gadol, everybody should be in charge. Shouldn't be this hierarchy. Why do Jews need hierarchy? We were all by Mount Sinai. We all heard God speak. So what's going on here? And he rebels against Moses. And Moses also makes a prayer. He says that if that to do a test, right? That 250 of Korach's people stand and try to bring an incense to God, and when these fire pans and Aaron, who his brother, who was it wasn't nepotism, but it was God said that Aaron should be in charge, right? So they were saying that Aaron was just nepotism, and Aaron stands on one side, and the fire comes from God, and Moses says, whoever is answered, and the fire comes down from heaven and burns the incense, you'll know who's the winner, right? And Moses makes a prayer, and he says that with this you shall know that he says whoever that if that happens, right, whoever's answered, whoever the fire comes down and burns their incense, their offering to God, will know who the winner is. And then he says, but if they die in a natural death, I'm not speaking on behalf of God. But if God makes a tremendous miracle and the earth opens and they're swallowed in, then we know that I'm coming from God. And as soon as he finishes speaking, the earth opens up, right? The people are the fire comes down from heaven, it burns the incense, it burns of Aaron, and it also burns the people, not the incense, but the people of from the Korach's camp, and the earth opens up, and Korach and his family are swallowed alive. Okay, so now we have another instance, that's the second instance of a prayer being answered immediately. The third instance is that the King Solomon's prayer. King Shlomo's prayer at the dedication of the temple, right? So we know that King David wanted to build a temple to God, a permanent house to God. At that point, there was still the tabernacle, right? It was a movable house, and it was in different places in the desert, right? But then it came to the land of Israel, and for about almost 400 years, they did not have a permanent house of God, and it was just this, the tabernacle that was moving from place to place. So King David wanted to build the temple, and he's told that he's not allowed to build the temple because he was a man of war. His job was to conquer the last parts of Israel that were not yet conquered. And even though those were mitzvahs, but the temple represents peace. It makes peace between man and God. So therefore, King David could not be that person. His son, King Solomon, was allowed to finally complete the construction of the temple. King David was only allowed to help in the construction and start the foundations and the design. So King Solomon, when he he makes a prayer to God that as follows: that after the temple is totally built and everything's ready to go, King Solomon prays to God that a fire should come from heaven and go into the altar in the temple. And it says that when Solomon finishes his prayer, and a fire comes down, and it takes the offerings that were on the altar, and they rejoice. And so that we see again, as soon as he finishes, he was done. Now, if we see if you notice, you paid attention very carefully, that something very specific that was a little bit different about the prayer that Eliezer did versus the prayers of Moses and King Solomon. And this is pointed out by the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitch Rebbe, whose birthday is this week, that it says by the prayer of both Moses and the prayer of Solomon, it says, for example, by Moses it says, I'll read it in English, that as soon as he finished speaking, okay, let's see, as soon as he finished speaking, and then the earth opened up, okay, and by King Solomon it says, when Solomon finished praying, right, as soon as he finished, the fire comes from heaven and becomes the temple is dedicated through God accepting their sacrifices. However, by Eliezer it says that Terem Kilol Ladaber, that he hadn't even finish speaking, before he finished speaking, that he sees Rivka, before he finishes his prayer to God, he sees Rivka coming. So why is Eliezer, right? Why is his prayer better, so to speak, than Moses and Solomon? And if you think about it, that we spoke about this a little bit last week, that this idea that before the giving of the Torah, there was this decree that the upper worlds and the lower worlds were not to mix, right, like oil and water, and therefore the mitzvahs that our forefathers did not have the same impact on the physical as the mitzvahs that we do now after the giving of the Torah. So why you would think that somebody who is talking before the giving of the Torah, meaning Eliezer, he's a servant of Abraham, right? So this is pre-Matan Torah, pre-Sinai, versus Moses is speaking post-Sinai, and eventually King Solomon obviously is post-Sinai. You would think that it would be easier because this decree that the upper worlds and lower worlds were to be was no longer to mix. They were allowed to come together after post-Sinai. That decree was abolished. So you would think that actually it'd be easier to have your prayer answered post-Sinai. But why is Eliezer, what's so special about this prayer of Eliezer, that even before he finishes speaking, he sees Rivka coming and his prayer is answered, and he finds the shidduch for Isaac, for Yitzchak. Okay, so it says in the Talmud as follows, that we see from this story of Eliezer, that Yafas Yichasan Shal Avdei Beis Avos Mitarasan Shal Banim, that the speech, the mundane speech of the servants of our forefathers is more beloved than the actual laws of the children. How do we know this? Because many things in the Torah are not directly said, right? Many laws in the Torah are not directly said. They're hinted to, right? For example, there are 39 different things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbos. It's only hinted to in the Torah in one small verse, and from there we understand that there are 39 principles that we cannot violate on Shabbos, right? But this story of Eliezer is actually repeated twice. Where is it repeated twice? First, the story happens, the Torah records the happening, and then when Eliezer comes to the house of Rivka, and he starts talking to the family about this whole shidduch proposal, he actually repeats the entire story. He repeats what happened, that Abraham told him what to do, which we already said. He repeats his prayer. He repeats how Rivka responds to the prayer. He says everything all over again. So why is this so important that we have to repeat the whole story? So in Hasidic philosophy, it's explained this idea that the shidduch of Isaac and Rivka, of Yitzchak and Rivka, is not just a regular shidduch. This isn't just like a shidduch that happened to be, right? Just a shidduch like any other shidduch, a match that just happened to come, and therefore it's a nice thing, and it just happens to be our forefathers. No. This actually represents a unification of the upper worlds and the lower worlds, and it's really the unification of the whole Jewish people, because we see that this whole match actually came from a whole special way. Number one, Isaac, like we mentioned, was on a very high level. He's the son of Abraham. He's destined to lead the Jewish people, and he's in the land of Israel, and he can't even lead in the land of Israel because he's been brought as a sacrifice. And then you have Rivka. Rivka, on the other hand, is just the opposite. Rivka grows up outside the land of Israel. She grows up in a horrible family, and our sages tell us that actually it's like that she in the Medrash it says that her father was a swindler, her brother was a swindler, the people of her place were also like that. And what is she compared to? Like a rose among the thorns. That's Rivka. Rivka did not come from a good family. Her father was a terrible person. He tried to actually, according to the Medrash, he tried to kill Eliezer, right? Who's coming with all these gifts and comes with a great shidduch suggestion. He tries to kill her. Her brother is Lavan, right? Lavan ends up being the father-in-law also of Jacob, but he tries to kill his own grandchildren who are going to be the start of the Jewish people. He swindles Jacob, right? And he takes advantage of him. Not a good family. But really what this represents is actually this unification of the upper worlds and the lower worlds. Isaac represents, obviously, the holy. Isaac represents the upper worlds, and Rivka represents the lower worlds. She grows up in the most worst place, in a place of total corruption, but they come together, and they create this union that actually will be the beginning of the Jewish people. So obviously, we can now understand this, why Eliezer's prayer was answered so quickly. Because it wasn't just about a random thing. It wasn't like, oh, I need some directions. So he asked God for directions. I need to find the right person, and and he's answered, and God shows him who it is. But because this is the quintessential shidduch, the quintessential match that will be the beginning of the Jewish people, both in a spiritual way and obviously in a physical way, that we are all descendants of this union, of this Jewish people. Okay. And now we could also understand why Abraham was so invested in this match. Because one thing that we didn't mention earlier is that when it says that when Eliezer comes to the family and he offers the family this shidduch, he says, I'm offering all of Abraham's possessions. Right? So it sounds like, what do you mean he's offering all of Abraham's possessions? So was he saying that Isaac is the sole inheritor of Abraham? What's going on here? This actually says, our rabbis tell us that that Abraham actually wrote a contract, and he said he's giving all his wealth to Isaac. Now, if we look at Maimonides, Maimonides says that even in the laws of charity, that a person should never give all his possessions away, because it says, because it's not a pious thing to become a pauper, right? If a person gives all his money away from charity, and therefore he has to be relying on charity himself, that's not mercy. You're actually becoming a charity case yourself. So therefore, Maimonides says, and this is the halacha, this is the law, that a person should never give more than a fifth of his possessions away. Right? Obviously, it's important to give. If a person has the means, they should give away a certain amount of their possessions, but they should not, in their own lifetime, give away all the possessions, because then he'll become a charity case if he gives away all his possessions. Okay, so why would Abraham do this? He did exactly that. He said he's giving away, and Abraham lived another. At that time, Abraham lived another. Abraham lives another 30 plus years, right? Abraham lives much longer after that. So why is he giving away? Yeah. He lived another 35 years. 35 years. Abraham at that point was 140 at the time of the shidduch, and he passed away at the age of 175, right? And again, because this match was the quintessential match for, again, of the entire Jewish people. This was not a simple wedding that represented just this family. This was a wedding that was going to represent the entire Jewish people, both in, like we said, both in a spiritual way and in a physical way. Now, coming back down to earth, what's the lesson for us? Right? What's the lesson? What does this have to do? Okay, so we see that Eliezer had a very good prayer system, and this was a very important match. What does it have to do? Like we know the Torah is not just a storybook, it's not a history book, it's a lesson, it's a manual, right, for every single one of us. So what's going on here? What does it have to do with me and you? So we know that sometimes it can be very difficult to make a match. We're not talking about a shidduch of a man and a woman coming together in matrimony. We're actually talking about, like we said earlier, the spiritual idea of bringing Torah, observing Torah and mitzvahs in this world that we live in. We live in a crazy world where we live in exile, both physically and even spiritually. How much more so, right? We see what's going on in the world, and sometimes it can be very difficult for a person to observe the Torah and do the mitzvahs. And these are good, these are valid points, right? It's a very difficult thing in the environment that we live in, especially where not everybody else is doing it. So we could learn something from the way that God answered Eliezer. That God saw that this was something so important, this idea of bringing heaven down to earth, which was what this shidduch of Isaac and Rivka really represented. And even even though Eliezer was just a servant, a simple servant of Abraham, he was a special person, obviously. He was a servant of Abraham. He was merited to do that, but he was not Jewish. He did not merit that Isaac should marry and his family, even though he suggested that. We don't know any of Eliezer's descendants today, right? What impact did Eliezer really have besides this shidduch? What is his legacy, right? His own personal legacy. All we know of him is that he was a servant of Abraham, right? But because of what he was doing was so important, God answered him even before he could finish his prayer, even faster than he answered Moses or King Solomon, some of the greatest people of all time. Maybe you could say the greatest people of all time. Because what he was doing was lighting up the world, bringing heaven down to earth. And this is what God really wants from us. And this is something that we all have to learn. That if we're in a situation that it's hard to do Torah and it's hard to observe mitzvahs, and it's not easy, it's not an easy environment, that if we turn to God and we ask God we shouldn't be disheartened, and we should ask God to help us, and surely he will help us. Even before we finish praying, he'll take care of all the issues that we could have, and God will for sure answer us even before we finish praying and give us everything we need in order to learn Torah and to do mitzvahs. Have a wonderful Shabbos, and next week the class will be Wednesday night live on Facebook and all the other places. All the best. Good Shabbos.